1. Moussaka and Chips. Vale Vuriunsty Cheverel was not cut out to be a young hero. At the Academia, he played truant from lectures as often as possible. Other young hero cadets gathered in the watery sunlight on the ancient caution steps that surrounded the learning halls, debating philosophy and strategy with their sandalled tutors. Vale studied time theory alone. He could spend days by himself, only leaving his books to stare from his tiny barrack room window at the wine-dark sky over the city. He would listen to the tales of the traders in the merchant port and space harbour below. Strange featured people who thought in strange accents as they bartered the wares of every exotic corner of the Gallifreyan Empire. They always bragged tales of the latest exploits of the heroes on the widening frontiers. Hunting the lacustrine Satizar and battling with the Griffney, whose great stone heads were studded with jewels. They brought news of the century-long siege of the Winter Star and a plague of batworms on the asteroid archipelago. But Vale did not want to mingle with these ruffians. He wanted only to listen and watch from a distance, just as he observed and watched his fellow cadets and was despised for it. He attended academic parades only on pain of expulsion, guessing that the Court of Principals would never carry out such a threat, for they knew that he was an individual. This was no guess, he had been good as told it. He had once seen his tutor speaking in the market with the aged and venerable Pythia from the city temples. The tutor's face was turning crimson as he tried not to choke, for the old priestess's blue, fur-trimmed robes reeked of the wood smoke and incense in which she was bathed when she consulted the past and future. She leaned from her palanquin and singled Vale out across the busy plaza, remarking on his thick mop of red gold hair, the sure sign of an individual. He would have made a good pilot, but he was too old for that now. He was certain she had meant him to hear, for she glanced directly at him as she spoke, but he blocked his own thoughts when he felt the pressure of her inquiring mind. She did not appear surprised. She simply grunted, her suspicions confirmed, and ordered her transport on. After that, the Court of Principals seemed more tolerant of Vale's misdemeanours. The warning reports to his home ceased, and the letters he sent back dwindled to perhaps one a season. During all his time in the city, he had been relieved to be 500 leagues from family ties and prying thoughts. He ignored his parents' show of concern for him, knowing that his welfare was secondary to family reputation. Their concern was confined to letters. They never visited him. Their merchant estate in the distant Soonwell Valley was expanding, and his elder sisters were both partners, with children of their own. Vale loathed the cadets' arduous training, especially the physical endurance courses. Sports, swordplay, and military manoeuvres bored him, so he exercised his mind in creating new excuses which would exempt him from attending lectures and practicals. This should have counted against him, but he had learned how far he could play on the tutor's tolerance and still get what he wanted. His capacity to remember things that children forget when they become adults did not desert him. Above all, his ability to shield his mind against the greatest curse of the Gallifreyan civilization marked him out as an individual among individuals. In the old days, before the intuitive revelation, secrets were a precious gift on Gallifrey. For most of the population, cursed with the relentless mental fog of telepathy, secrets were an unfathomable mystery. No idea or notion was yours alone. The air ceaselessly droned with the commentary of public opinion. The thoughts of people's minds invaded each other's heads in an unending chorus of unharmony, before passing into the great pool of collective existence that made up the root of Gallifreyan culture. Some cadets could be taught to shut out the endless babble. To others, the shutting out came naturally. Yet those who succeeded faced the greatest horror of all for a Gallifreyan, the terrible isolation of silence. Only those who endured this fate would rise from the plebeian masses as individuals, with all the makings of a young hero. It was at the time of the return of the mighty hero Pridonius from his greatest voyage that Vale failed his final assessments. When he saw the posted results, he just shrugged and headed back through the gathering crowds for the privacy of his solitary barrack room. Winter was biting at the city early, freezing the mud on the streets that were unheated, and that year many more streets were cold than before. The dreary summers of recent times seemed havens of warmth in comparison. A bitter wind from the northern lakes sighed through the dingy corridors. Steam rose in carved clouds from the food stalls in the market. The sharpened air buzzed with the thoughts of the people as the crowds choked those streets that were heated, rejoicing in the hero's return. The whisper was that one of the future legends had been fulfilled. Vale blocked his mind from the rumours, but there was no escape. The media were equally full of Pridonius's triumphant homecoming. Live coverage on all channels as the hero's ship, the Hippolytan, docked in the flight harbour, its space-coralled prow nudging into the icy anchor gantries. On the quays, the cheering crowds were already working themselves into a frenzy. Vale heard a knock on the door. He knew it would be Loie, the cadet in the next room, the only one who bothered to talk to him, even though he despised her. Loie would have seen the results as well, but Vale could exist without her sympathy. He resisted making a fierce retaliation to the inquiring thoughts that came through the door. Instead, he shut himself off from her persistent knocking and thought no giveaway thoughts at all. On the screen there were in-depth interviews with Pridonius and his crew, relating their quest into the blood-red mists of distant Thule, where they had overthrown the reign of a marauding sphinx. There were visual reports from the documentary team that had accompanied the voyage, but despite the euphoria, all the interviewers pressed home two questions. Was this the last of the epic space journeys? And did the new experiments into time travel number the days of the space voyager? Haclav Augusti Pridonius, the hero and seasoned interviewee, shook his mane of black hair and laughed out loud. I'm no lackey of Rassilon and his neo-technologists. There'll be no substitute for the old order. To affirm this, he produced his greatest trophy, retrieved from the ruin of Thule, the severed head of the Sphinx itself. Preserved temporagenically, it would be donated to the Academia Library for study. Perhaps, Pridonius added mockingly, it would be persuaded to divulge the answers to some of its riddles. Vale switched off the screen in disgust and wrapped himself in a fury he was unaware he harboured. He knew he was special, even appointed for some future he could not yet see. He would not be next to nothing, not sink back into the faceless chorus of the people. He railed at the injustice of the gods, the capricious and all-powerful Menti Celesti, who saw all things but did nothing. Shaking, he reeled round and fell back in tenor at the implacable figure that stood over him. The Pythia, her mask-like face streaked with gold and her long grey ringlets coiled with silver wire. She was a cold statue, but Vale caught the wood smoke smell and saw the talismans that hung from her robes, glinting with the trapped starlight of long-lost constellations. The only thought Vale heard, and was unable to block out, was, "How wasteful!" The silent look that it accompanied was of downright contempt for his failure. In a rage that forgot the deference due to a priestess so venerable, Vale thrust back a defiant curse on all the ritual and law of Gallifrey. Your days are numbered. Superstition will be swept away in the new age of reason. The Pythia's gilded eyes narrowed for a moment, and her bony hand clutched at the sceptre head of the wand on which she leaned. In that instant, Vale felt her search into his mind as clearly as the star-glass through which she saw other ancient Pythias in other worlds and times. He thought to feign dutiful shame, but what was the point? By now the priestess understood that he was special too. For long moments outside the natural ebb of thought, he was held speechless by her scrutiny. Then her eyes, unnaturally black like the void, released him. He was dismissed. A torrent of thoughts flooded his unshielded mind. The carnival of Pridonius's victory parade through the snowy city. The cacophony of Gallifreyan minds was for once unified into a single harmonised and joyous chorus of triumph. Like the radiant sun in the sky, supreme in glory, so Pridonius, our greatest hero, returns in glory to Gallifrey. Vale fell back unconscious. He clung to the sides of his sleeping pallet as the stars whirlpooled above him. He was the centre point on which the reckless universe spun. Silhouetted figures darted across the blaze of coloured gas clouds, and white meteors traced a web of paths against the radiance. Against the spinning vortex, a head leaned in over him, upside down like an examining physician. "So that's the dream!" Vale yelled aloud. From light eons past came the angry roar of the pitiless Sphinx. Vale cried out in fear at a bent figure, cowled in darkness, that reached out a skeletal hand to him for help. The hood of shadow slid back to reveal the wizened face. An old man imploring the brash youth he had once been to think again and change the ordained future. In the dream half-light, Vale knew himself. Through the dark iridescence of the cosmos came the distant flicker of a star. As it approached, Vale saw that its light had a regular pulse. It crowned a hard oblong that tumbled towards him out of the maelstrom. The shape's blue-panelled surfaces snatched at the primal glare of starlight as they spun. Vale willed it to stop, but there was no escape. How could he control his dreaming? How did he know that the unreadable runes on its sides read "Police Public Call Box"? It tumbled nearer. It would crush him. "This one's on me," said Ace across the cafe table. The doctor smiled gratefully at his young companion and stopped fishing through his moneyless pockets. He sat back and contemplated the dog-eared menu. "Baked Alaska," he said. "Yeah." She draped her battered black jacket with all the badges on the back of the chair. The doctor was intrigued. "Frozen in the middle but hot on the outside. Ice cream and hot meringue. Fascinating. I've never been to Alaska. All right, I'll have one. As long as you eat it as well as analyse it." He wasn't sure about that, but agreed to keep Ace happy. "And a glass of water too, please," he added, and sat back contented. Ace wished he would take his hat off. He seemed to have been wearing the same jacket and paisley scarf for at least the past month relative time, but they never looked any worse for wear. The traffic on Ealing Broadway was busy for a Sunday, if it was still Sunday. Ace couldn't remember a night in between that could have led to Monday. The amount of planet hopping that she and the doctor had clocked up lately should have made jet lag feel like a mild headache. It didn't, because, she suspected, the TARDIS somehow compensated. She reckoned the doctor's time machine had idiosyncrasies like that, even moods, like its owner. But she and the doctor needed a decent meal, not a foil-wrapped jumble of flavoured nutrient bars dished out from the TARDIS lunch machine. Ace had instinctively renamed the ship's food dispenser in revenge for the doctor's persistent use of pseudo-jargon and alien folklore, stuff she had to pretend to understand. The trouble was, he was usually serious about it, and it was difficult to sneer at something improbably called the Hand of Omega when the next minute it was coming after you for its lunch. Lunch, where she had started. Since Perivale was dead as a dodo, or Didus ineptus, as the doctor called it, they had checked that the TARDIS was still parked on the corner of a leafy housing estate and caught the bus to Ealing. It was only 3 years since she had left, yet some familiar shops on the Broadway had already been replaced by newer, blander commodity outlets. The doctor eyed the window displays of mannequins in the department stores with a mixture of curiosity and what looked like suspicion. "Never be certain of what you think you see," he muttered. He was in one of his quieter moods, the quiet before another storm of activity, so Ace steered him into the first cafe they came to while she still had the chance. She recognised the bored waitress who eventually sidled over as a girl from a year below her at school. Debbie, whatever her name was, didn't recognise Ace at all. She wrote down the order for 1 moussaka and chips, 1 baked Alaska, 1 glass of water, and 1 glass of milk, as if she was on automatic pilot. You'd probably get more sense out of Captain Lunchbox in the TARDIS. The Doctor was starting to fidget with his cutlery. Ace watched him, wondering why he suddenly looked so out of place. He normally slotted naturally into any situation, however bizarre, from alien ice cave to Victorian dinner party. Was it because 20th century suburban London was her territory, and elsewhere in the galaxy they were both alien? She looked across the cafe at a painting by the fire exit. Against a parched background of craggy rocks and broken trees, 3 grey swans were swimming on a mirror-surfaced lake. But in the water, the reflections of the swans appeared as elephants. Well, weird. Ace froze. A large marmalade tomcat had just walked in from the back of the cafe. It stopped and surveyed the occupants of the cafe as barely tolerated intruders in its territory. Eventually, its amber eyes settled on Ace and stared with an unnerving impassiveness that made the girl want to run. Her aversion to cats, especially black ones, had only recently developed. It wasn't an allergy, they just brought out the worst in her. Feelings she didn't talk about. The Tom walked casually between the tables with the sort of mooching purposefulness that set Ace's teeth on edge. She braced herself for something terrible. The Doctor was contemplating the traffic outside. "Nothing to worry about," he said quietly without looking at her. "What? Just an ordinary cat. No need to get so jumpy." When Ace looked again, the cat had gone. "Back into the kitchen. Probably his dinner time too," said the Doctor, but he was still watching the traffic. How could he know that without looking? Irritated, Ace pretended to study the picture again, but she secretly watched him from the corner of her eye. Her friend, the Doctor. Outwardly, a clownish eccentric, a genius in human terms, but that was just the bit you were allowed to see. An alien with a Scottish accent. Travelling through time and space with him, Ace had had the chance to look closer, and, through the occasional cracks in his veneer, she glimpsed a darker, huger intellect. It all seemed very alien, detached and powerful, as if the Doctor was just something the intellect went about in. Or was it just her imagination? Never be certain of what you think you see. Sometimes the darkness seeped from the cracks, and those it touched might get hurt. Ace had learned from her own bruises that no one who met the Doctor was left unchanged. Yet he was kind, compassionate, spiky, and often angry, vulnerable to all mortal foibles. But that might be deliberate. He embraced them eagerly as if they were toys, lingering on one world or another as if to play them out or test their capacity. He was just as dangerous as the evil he attracted and opposed. So what if he did have eyes in the back of his head, had appalling taste in clothes, and careered around the universe in a time machine shaped like a police box? If he said it could change shape, she believed him. He was 25 out of 10 to be with. She prayed her time with him would never, ever end. She caught a flash of light in the window and realised that the Doctor had been watching the reflection in the glass. Debbie What's-It was delivering food to the family of 3 at the next table. It was 5:30 on a Sunday afternoon in July. So why was the dusk gathering outside? The sky, which had been a Hollywood blue, was turning a lurid orange. The passers-by on Ealing Broadway seemed to be going through fits and starts of slow motion. "Professor," said Ace to the Doctor, but he shushed her into silence. Turning round, he pulled a silly face at the little girl, an angelic toddler of no more than 2, seated in a high chair at the next table. She played her spoon into a bowl of ice cream while her parents fussed indulgently, their skin flickering the dead colour of mushroom soup. The clock above the kitchen door slid slowly down the wall over the pelmet and dripped to the floor. "Professor? Doctor? What's happening?" The Doctor put his hand up to the side of his head as if he was in pain. He had turned very pale. The little girl looked up at him. "Hello, Alice," he whispered. "You have lovely eyes." Around them, the perspective of the walls started to shift, closer here, then farther, until Ace could see through their opaque framework into the juddering reality outside. She clung to the sides of her chair tightly. "Baked Alaska?" asked Debbie, walking with their order across the shifting tiles of the floor. Alice's eyes were the colour of the stolen sky, framed by the fiery red gold of her hair. She gazed inquiringly at the doctor. He shook his head in despair. "I don't know," he said. "You tell me what happens next." The little girl turned her head and looked out of the window. "Pussycat," she said. "Meow, meow." They followed her gaze. A cat was sitting on the ruptured pavement outside, staring intently in at them. It wasn't a kitten. It was a very small, perfectly proportioned adult cat, and its coat was shimmering silver. "Do you want this or not?" said Debbie. The moussaka, half congealed on the plate, opened out like a rose. Within its milk-white petals was a heart of fire. The doctor tipped forward onto the table with a moan of pain. Unable to use the disintegrating floor to reach him, Ace clambered over the table. The cutlery and condiments scuttled to get out of her way. She cradled and clung to the trembling doctor. "Is he all right?" said Alice's father, getting up from his place. "You should call an ambulance," said Alice's mother. Debbie turned and ran for the kitchen. The doctor stared out of the window at the cat. "What does it want?" whispered Ace. "What's happening?" The sky pulsed balefully like a beacon with a light that came from the north and Perivale. A 207 bus sped past, its windows reflecting a barren desert. The whole concept and existence of Ealing Broadway was beginning to curl at the edges. "The TARDIS," choked the doctor. The cat rose and trotted up the street, out of view. With a sudden burst of energy, the doctor pulled himself free of Ace. Sending his chair clattering away, he staggered towards the door. The walls of the cafe began to resolve again, blotting out the abyss of clouds beyond them. Ace was hurrying after the doctor, but a shout from Debbie called her back. "Here!" she snapped. She slammed a plastic bag of 20p winnings from a pub fruit machine down on the table. "Oi!" shouted Debbie as Ace disappeared out onto the Broadway. "You didn't even eat it!" She looked at the baked Alaska, already melting in the afternoon sunshine. "Weirdies," agreed Alice's parents. "Bye-bye, pussycat," said Alice, and got on with stirring her ice cream.